Hello besties, welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new. My name is Hallie and I'm so happy that you're here. Today we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read this summer. I really wanted to do this video because I kind of entered a really bad slump going into like May of this year. I kept starting a bunch of books and I didn't finish any of them. Part of that I attribute to my ADHD, but part of that I also just think is because I was in a slump and none of them were like gripping my attention. It just was kind of a disaster. So I entered a really bad slump in like the beginning of May. I was in the middle of like 18 books or something crazy like that. And I kind of stayed in a slump all the way until I think August-ish. So throughout the course of the summer, I wasn't doing any monthly reading wrap-ups. I hardly posted any reading vlogs. I feel like now that I'm out of my slump and I had a pretty good reading month in August and I did read a few books throughout June and July as well. I think March and April I only read like one book. So I figured I would just do a June, July, and August reading wrap up. Technically the months of summer, so kind of like a little summer reading wrap up before we go into fall. As you can see, I did end up getting out of my slump, so I do have quite a few books to talk about today, but it feels really weird to have this many books that I haven't really like talked to you guys about that much because typically I record a reading vlog for like every single book that I read, so it feels really weird to have so many books that I don't have like videos out for. Some of the ones from August, or most of the ones from August, I feel like do have videos for because that's when I was kind of getting back into the swing of things. But all of that to say, today we are going to be talking about all the books that I read this summer reading wrap up. Let's get started. I think that these are all in order of when I read them. I might have a couple here and there out of order, but for the most part, as far as I know, these are in the order that I read them. So we are going to start in June. The first book that I read in June is The Night Shift by Megan Golden. I always want to say Goldwyn, but it's Golden. This one I actually listened to the audiobook for. It basically follows a true crime podcast, and the lady who does the true crime podcast goes to this town to follow like a court trial, and she starts receiving letters from this girl who years and years and years prior, her sister was, she thinks, murdered in this town, but it was ruled as a suicide, and so she starts sending her letters while she's in town to try and hint at proof basically that that happened and trying to get her to pick up her sister's story so that they can catch the true killer. So it's really cool because you get to follow the court case that is happening currently, but then you're also getting dropped hints and pieces of the story that happened in the past timeline as well. And I really did enjoy listening to the audiobook of this because of the podcast element. I love listening to audiobooks that have a podcast element to it. I feel like it just adds a whole nother layer to the audiobook. This one I rated 3 stars. I feel like it was a little bit slow paced at times, and also it was a really heavy topic, and I feel like there wasn't a lot of relief to that. Like a lot of times whenever I read books with heavy topics, I need a little bit of like comedic relief, a romantic relief or something, and this was very much a serious book, and so it did feel very heavy just to listen to. Definitely look up the trigger warnings if you are going to read or listen to this. I feel like it does talk about a lot of sensitive material, obviously because you are following 2 different court cases and just a lot happens and a lot is talked about in this. But overall, a solid 3-star mystery thriller. I feel like it wasn't anything too thrilling. It was definitely more of just like a mystery, like you're just trying to uncover it. I feel like that's also part of the reason why I rated it 3 stars, just because I wasn't necessarily on the edge of my seat. It didn't have like a crazy twist ending. I feel like because it was more supposed to be just a like regular mystery, like you're just slowly unraveling the pieces and then the pieces come together at the end and then that's it. So solid 3-star. The next one that I have is The Night Shift by Annie Crown. This was, I think, her debut romance novel. This book is very like unserious, and I feel like if you go into it wanting a very serious, not even just serious, but a very like emotionally deep, I guess more serious romance, you are not gonna like this. This is very much giving just a fun, unserious, spicy time, and that's it. Like if you just want a really quick, spicy, fun book, this would be it. So this book follows Kendall and Vincent. They basically have a honestly out-of-pocket meet cute at the library one night. She's like a little librarian. She volunteers at the library every Friday night because it's the shift that like no one else wants, but she's such a homebody and loves reading and is very shy that she loves the Friday night shift because it's just her in the library, and she loves like being in the library at night, hence night shift. Vincent is like the star player of the basketball team, and one night he ends up in the library on a Friday night, catches her off guard. They have a really crazy meet cute. You basically follow their story throughout the book of her being like the shy bookworm girl and him being the star basketball player. Like I said, it's nothing like crazy. It's just, you know, a short little fun, unserious romance. I rated this 3 stars. If you need something like mindless between other heavier books, I feel like this would be good. But again, it is pretty spicy, so if you don't like spice, you probably won't like this. I don't know how else to explain that one. The next one that I read is The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose, and I actually audiobooked this one as well. This one follows a couple who the wife is a really successful defense attorney, I believe, and the husband has been very unsuccessful in his writing career. You basically find out that the husband is having an affair on the wife, and one day the girl who he is having an affair with turns up dead at his and his wife's lake house vacation home. And so obviously everyone's like, okay, it's him, like he did it, you know, duh. But she ends up taking up the case in representing him and trying to prove his innocence. And so you're basically following the course of the court case essentially. And it's really cool because you get POV of him, the POV of her, and you're just trying to figure out like what did happen to her, because when you're in his POV, he's obviously like, I didn't do it, but it's like, do I believe you? And then on the other hand, you have the wife's POV where she's trying to kind of see all the clues and put all the pieces together and see if it really was him or not. So very interesting. I rated this one 3 stars as well. It's just like a decent mystery thriller. It wasn't anything crazy. I feel like I remember being a tiny bit disappointed by the ending, but yeah, not one of my all-time favorites, but definitely still really entertaining. It kept my attention from start to finish. So that's that one. Next, we have The Serpent and the Wings of Night. You guys have probably heard me yap about this so much at this point. I love this book so much. I rated this 5 stars, of course. This little duology has become one of my all-time favorite fantasy duologies. It's so good. In this book, you follow Aurea. She is a human living in the vampire realm. One day, her human city came under attack by this breed of vampires, and like everyone else in the town either fled or died during the attack, and she happened to be saved and rescued by the king of the Nightborn vampires. And he essentially is known for being like the strongest, most brutal king ever. But he saves this human girl. No one understands why, and everyone kind of resents her for being his little human plaything. But he raises her in a way to be like super strong, and he's like, basically, I need to train you up to be as strong as possible so you can survive in the land of vampires. I see you as my daughter, this whole thing. And essentially the whole point of him training her up her whole life to be strong and be a good warrior is so that one day she can enter these trials called the Kajari. And what the Kajari is it's essentially a set of trials that the goddess Nyaxia puts on, and she's the goddess who created the vampires. She puts them on. You basically fight to the death. One person wins and one person is granted a wish, and she is going to use her wish to essentially be able to become as strong as a vampire. She's gonna like tie herself to her dad Vincent. I forget what that act is actually called, but that's essentially what the wish does. It like ties her to his power, so she will be as strong as him, but they will be like connected. And so you are following Aurea, a human, go through these deadly vampire trials, and this book has one of the best enemies to lovers slow burn plot lines ever. It is so good. I think about the series every single day, and honestly I was afraid to start the series because I was really intimidated by the cover. I don't know why, but the cover was giving like it's a very serious fantasy, but it is so easy to get into. I love Carissa Broadbent's writing. It's so entertaining, and like I said, easy to understand, easy to get into. I feel like honestly, if you're a beginner in fantasy, you definitely could read this and get into it and understand it without any issues. So 5 stars. Directly after reading The Serpent and the Wings of Night, I went into this novella called 6 Scorched Roses. This is part of the Nightborn duet. It's just a novella that goes in between the 2 books in the duology. This does follow a different set of characters than the 2 books that duology follows, but the 2 characters that this follows are like side characters, so you will see them throughout the story, but they just got their own little book. And again, 5 stars. I feel like this is honestly one of the best novellas I have ever read. Looking back on this, I still can't believe that this was as short as it was because of how much depth and information we got into the characters and the plot line. It just was so good. I sat down and I read this in one sitting. Honestly, the duology and the novella, unmatched. If you have not read them yet, please read them because they're so good. After that, I read The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. This one, guys, I was so disappointed by. This is actually the first and only book that I've ever rated 2.5 stars. I have never gone into the 2-star range because for me, 2 stars kind of starts to get into like I disliked this book, and I was so disappointed by it because when it started out, it started off so strong. Like I feel like the beginning of this story had so much potential for me, and then after like, I don't know, the 50-75 page mark, it just went downhill. And I feel like it's because in the beginning, the setup of the plot and the world I loved so much. Like I said, the plot had so much potential to be more than it did. I feel like the reason that I disliked this so much is because one, it started out so strong with the plot, and then I feel like the whole second half of the book had zero plot development, and it really didn't end up being about the plot. It really ended up being more about the romance, which I didn't like because the male main character was so broody and grumpy, but not in a good way. He was like a genuine asshole. Don't get me wrong, I love a grumpy male main character, okay? Because I've talked about it many times before. I don't understand why I like them so much because if a man in real life ever tried, I would literally fight on sight. But in a book, I love grumpy male main characters. So for me not to like him because he's too rude is honestly like, that should say something. He just, some of the like smut scenes really put me off of this because it just kept getting worse. I don't know, I really dislike this male main character, and the ending of this book is diabolical, and not like in a good, it just like made me hate him even more. I'm gonna read the second book. I'm going to, because the ending of this book was so diabolical and I hate him so much that now I need to see it through. I feel like if that doesn't make sense to you, it's just not gonna make sense, and if it does, it does. I am planning on reading the second book to this because it is a duology too, so like once I read the second book, I'll have closure, you know? I just need to know. But anyway, very disappointed by this one. I just feel like it had so much potential and I was really, really let down by it. If you like, you know, dark romance where the guy is kind of like I remember at one point, no, I just don't know. I wouldn't recommend this book. I feel like there's so many better enemies to lovers romances that I could recommend. I didn't even tell you guys what this was about because I'm just gonna read you the synopsis because I don't even feel like taking the time. I just like did not like this book, and I like feel that disappointment again every time that I talk about it. Fleeing my father's cruelty, the wicked king who robbed me of a future, I faced death in the streets, caught between a rebellion and a tyrant's reign. Captured by those sworn to kill me, the rebels remain to blind my true identity. The missing daughter of the despised king. Faced with an impossible choice, I stand before them, join the rebels, or face the blades. See, like that is such a good premise. It's set up so well, like all of the fight scenes whenever she got captured, them displaying all of their powers, like it was so good. The descriptions were so good, the world building was so good, everything was so good. The thing that ruined it for me was the romance in this book, and the fact the plot literally stopped developing after the first 75 pages. Like it was like so much good building and development until the first 75 pages, and then for the rest of the book, it was like romance that I didn't enjoy at all because I don't like the male main character and I don't like the way that he treats the female main character. It was not romantic or cute to me in any way. And then the last like 20 pages of the book, it's like, oh hey, actually we gotta hurry up and get some plot in here and set up for the second book. But it's like a lot of progress, zero progress. Let's throw in a bunch of plot at the end of the book, and also a despicable ending so that people want to come back and read the second book, which I guess you got me there because I am gonna read the second book, but it's just like, I don't know. The next book that I have is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is actually my first ever Emily Henry read, and it has sent me down an Emily Henry rabbit hole, as I should have known. It was so good. The premise for this book is so funny. If you haven't already heard of Funny Story, this book follows Daphne. She has recently been broken up with by her fiance, and her fiance left her for his childhood best friend, whom throughout their relationship, he has always maintained that they have no romantic feelings with each other. They're just childhood friends, besties, whatever. And then literally, I think it was like a month before they were supposed to get married, he drops the engagement and gets engaged to her, his childhood best friend, who he has no romantic feelings for. Despicable, right? So then she needs a place to live on short notice because her life has been turned upside down. No one else in this world could possibly understand what she's feeling and going through except her ex-fiance's new fiance's ex-fiance. So she moves in with Miles, who is her fiance's childhood friend's ex-fiance, because obviously whenever Daphne got broken up with, the other couple broke up as well. So they're both going through it, being left by their partners. And this book ended up being so emotional, and I did not see it coming. Like, from that premise, do you expect a deeply emotional romance? No, but that's what you get, because by the end of this, I was so deeply attached to the characters, like tearing up. It had such an emotional impact that you just would not expect from a story with that plotline, if that makes sense. And genuinely, I talk about this all the time. I think about this book all the time because the female main character in this book, Daphne, is a librarian, and I loved her little storyline as a librarian. It literally made me want to become a librarian because it just seemed so fun and cute. And they're actually building a new library right next to my house, and every single time that I drive past it after I take Bowie to school, I think about this book, and I think about Daphne, and I think about the fact that I want to be a cute little librarian, and I'm so excited to have that little library next to my house because every time I go to it, I'm going to think of Daphne. I love this book, rated at 5 stars. This was the beginning of my Emily Henry obsession, and I know that this is kind of controversial. I feel like a lot of people didn't love this book because a lot of people didn't like the male main character for some reason, because he was a little bit like, well, first of all, he's imperfect, and I feel like I like that about Emily Henry's characters too, is they're so believable. Like, they genuinely feel like real people, and so he's very like imperfect, and he's not the typical male main character that you see in books, but I feel like I really appreciated that. Like, I don't want to read about this same exact guy every single time that I pick up a romance, you know? And I feel like his character he was so unique and so real. I just love them, and I love this book. And then the last book that I read in June is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the second book in the like Divine Rivals. I think it's called like the Letters of Enchantment duology or something. But the first book in this duology is Divine Rivals. I rated that 5 stars. This is the second book in the conclusion to that duology. I rated this 5 stars. This holds such a special place in my heart, and it forever will. This second book took me on such a journey, and again, I feel like this is kind of a controversial one because I've seen a lot of people say that they did not like the second book as much as the first book because it's not as focused on the romance. There's a lot more like politics in this book, but not in the way that you would think. It's just a lot more plot driven, and like the characters are separate for a lot more of this book as well. But I loved it so much. I feel like it kept my attention from start to finish. It was emotional. I loved it, and I love the way that it ended. I don't know, I know a lot of people do not agree with me on this, but I really like it. I almost like it more than the first book because the first book, obviously you spend a lot of time doing setup. It just seems a lot more slow, and in this book you're just like really into it, and so much happens, and I feel like it's a little bit more like action-y than the first book. So I don't know, I kind of like the second one better than the first book. Sue me. Love her. 5 stars. Moving on to July, I think I only read 3 books. The first book that I read is Reckless by Lauren Roberts. This is the second book in the Powerless trilogy. If you know me, you know I love Powerless. I heart Kai until the day I die. So this was a very, very, very highly anticipated new release. I rated this one, I think 4.75 stars. It was so close to a 5 star. I just wanted a little bit more plot to this, but overall it was so cute. It had such a cute little like cat and mouse chase, and I feel like it was very much like a let's go on an adventure type of vibe, and also the best romantic cutie little love confession. And also, let's not talk about how the ending of this left me so gagged. I genuinely am in denial. Like, if you ask me, the book actually didn't end like that. I just refuse to accept it's true because I can't go on knowing that that's how this book ended. So I'm just choosing to live in a different reality where the book didn't actually end the way that it did, so I can keep my sanity until the next book comes out, which I think is supposed to be next year. I'm so excited. I think that she is supposed to come out with another novella between this book and the last book at some point. It hasn't been announced yet, but I'm pretty sure she said somewhere that a novella is supposed to be coming out between this book and the last book. So I'm patiently waiting. I cannot believe that this book ended the way it did. Honestly, it's so out of pocket. Like, why, Lauren? The next book that I read in July is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, and I actually ended up listening to the audiobook for this one, and I thought the premise of this was so good for summertime because it follows these disappearances that keep happening at this summer camp. And so you get like a dual timeline because you're learning about a disappearance that happened at this summer camp like 10 years prior or something, and then in the current time zone you're following the disappearance that like just happened, like as it's being investigated. And the two people people that go disappearing are both part of the same family, so you have that family tie connection there. This one I did end up a little bit disappointed by. I rated it 3 stars because it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't my favorite by any means. I definitely feel like if I was not listening to the audiobook, I would not have made it through the book. I may have DNF'd it, or it just would have taken me a lot longer to get through because it was just very, very slow. I feel like there was kind of a lot in it that felt a little bit too mundane, like maybe there was a different way we could have gone about giving us the information. And then the ending just felt so like underwhelming. It just felt like, why did I just go through almost 500 pages for that ending? So I don't know, overall I feel like the book felt a little bit too long. In my opinion, wasn't the best, but it was still a decent read. The audiobook was at least entertaining. And then the last book that I read in July is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. This is the second book in the Nightborn duology, so the book that comes after The Serpent and the Wings of Night and Six Scorched Roses, which I talked about earlier. This one, again, rated 5 stars. So good. Literally so much happens in this book. It's kind of crazy to think back on, but like, again, the romance in this is so good. And I feel like this series has the perfect mix of romance and plot because so much happens plot-wise, but I feel like neither one or the other is kind of like outweighed. I mean, I guess this one does have quite a bit more plot than the first book, but for my personal reading interest and reading taste, I feel like it had the perfect amount of like romance to plot developments. So I don't know, these characters have my heart. I think about them genuinely every single day, and I cannot wait to read more of Carissa Broadbent's books because, like I said, the only 3 books that I've ever read from her is this duology and the novella, and they've all been 5 stars. Moving on to August. First book that I read in August is The Heartless Hunter. This, again, is so good. This is kind of my first ever like witchy type of vibe fantasy, but it's not witchy as in like riding broomsticks and using a wand to cast spells and pointy hats at all. The magic system in this is so interesting because the witches in this society use blood to write, I think they're called like casting signatures or something like that, but essentially the witches will like cut and use that fresh blood to like draw a casting signature, and for each different type of like design, it's like a different type of spell. And then if you're a witch and you cut yourself to use your blood, it leaves like a little silver scar. So basically everyone knows who is a witch because the witches would do it in a way where it almost looks like tattoos, like they would cut the marks in a way that it's like a design. That way their body was full of beautiful artwork made out of scars, I guess. But in this society, witches are outlawed, and there's essentially like a huge manhunt to find all of the witches. And there's one witch in particular who we are following. Her name is Rune. She is a part of high society. She's a very important and rich woman in this town, and she is an undercover witch. She doesn't have any casting scars because she didn't know that she was a witch whenever they became getting outlawed. And then once she matured and got her period one day, that's whenever she discovered that she is a witch, because if you are a witch, you have black period blood. At this point, all the witches that she knows have been sent to die because there was that manhunt, and so she's out here alone hiding the fact that she is a witch, and she is using her witch abilities and her high status in society to try and help other witches either escape once they're captured in the prison or just escape the island before they're ever found out that they're witches. On the other hand, you have Gideon. He's the captain of the Blood Guard, and they're kind of like the police for the city, but his main job is to hunt down and capture witches. He suspects Rune of being the Crimson Moth, and she doesn't know that he suspects her. She is trying to get him to court her so that they can get married and she can have unlimited access to like where the Blood Guard is hiding all the witches and who they're planning on going after next and what they know, because he is the head of the Blood Guard. So in her, she's like, this is like the perfect match for me to make. I basically will have all this information that I need for the rest of my life. And he is courting her specifically to try and unveil her as the Crimson Moth. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse little thing, and they're both hunting each other essentially in different ways. And it is just so good. And the ending of this book is insane. I cannot wait for the next book to come out. I am so excited. 5 stars. The next book that I have is The Awakening. This is the first book in the Zodiac Academy. I rated it 4 stars. This book gives such a cozy fall fantasy vibe, but also it feels so nostalgic. Like it gives me the same feeling as if you were reading Twilight or The Hunger Games or like something from your childhood, even though it's definitely like an adult fantasy. It's like the weirdest thing. I don't know like how it gives those vibes, but it's just so good. It's so easy to read. It's very entertaining. In this book, you're following Darcy and Tori. They are a set of twins who has grown up in the human realm. And one day, I think when they're like 18, someone from the Fae realm comes and escorts them back to the Fae realm with them, drops them off at the Zodiac Academy, which is like a college for Fae who have all different kinds of powers. And they are told that they are actually the long lost princesses to this realm, and that in order to reclaim the throne and get their inheritance, they have to go through the schooling at the Zodiac Academy, harness their newfound powers, and prove their strength to the Fae world. That's kind of what you're following, and it's crazy. The next one that I have on my list, I actually don't have the physical copy for yet, but it is The Risk. This is the first book in the Mindfuck series. If you don't know what that is, if you haven't seen any of my videos where I talk about it, the Mindfuck series is a compilation of 5 different novellas that were put into one book called the Mindfuck series. It essentially follows a revenge serial killer who starts dating an FBI agent who hunts serial killers. He ends up getting put on her case without knowing that it's actually her that he's looking for. And so again, it's like kind of like a little cat and mouse type thing where he's constantly like going to the crime scenes that she has done, but he doesn't know it's her. And over the case of the story, you just unravel so much, and it's so much better than I anticipated it being. I feel like every book that you go on to just gets better and better and better. Even though you think it just can't get any better, it just keeps getting better. I will say, please look up the trigger warnings if you are sensitive to different subjects. A lot of very serious things are talked about in that series and in graphic detail, so please actually look up the trigger warnings if you were like sensitive to stuff like that. But other than that, it is such a deeply heartbreaking, insane story. The next one that I have on this list here is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I actually listened to this on audiobook. This one I rated 3.5 stars, I think. It wasn't my favorite, but also again, like wasn't bad. I just think that dark gothic fantasy and romantasy is not my favorite, at least so far. This little duology is the only like gothic fantasy that I've read, so I guess I can't really say that with certainty because like I haven't tried out too many, but so far it's not the favorite thing that I have read, but a lot of people love this book. So the next book that I have is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This was my first step into the world of Holly Black. This is another fantasy that I feel like for some reason the cover really intimidated me with. Now that I've read it, I'm like, I don't know why it was intimidating me because it's honestly such an easy read and so good. I rated this 5 stars. When I tell you the plot took me where I never expected it to take me. This is a YA fantasy. You follow Jude, who again is a human living in the Fae world. What happens is, well, you know, I don't want to say that because I don't want to spoil anything, but basically her and her twin sister and her older sister all end up living in the land of fairy. And I love her character because as a human living in the Fae world, she showcases just like how it's okay to want to be strong in a world where you are inherently week. The whole first half of this book, I was like, this is just the coziest vibe ever. I love the setting and the description of the land of fairy. It's very much giving picnic blankets and cheese and fairies, and it talks about fairy wine and just like all this stuff. I love that vibe. But when I tell you the second half of the book, it just gets so crazy. There's like twists and turns that I just did not see coming at all. And the ending of the book had me gagged. It had me so gagged. It was so good. Immediate 5 stars. I love it so much. If you have not read this, I definitely recommend. Like I said, it's a YA. It's super easy to get into, to understand. You just like fly through it. The next book that I have is A Court of Silver Flames. This is the last book that's currently out in the ACOTAR series. I don't want to say too much about what the plot about this one is about because I don't want to like spoil anything. This book was so good. I feel like for me, it definitely started out very slow, and I talked to my sister about this and she was like, I feel like the reason that it starts off slow is because of the POV that you're in. You're feeling what the character is feeling, and the character is feeling very meh, and so it feels very meh. But I feel like that's just because you're feeling like what the character is going through and like has to get out of that. And by the end of this, again, just gagged. And I feel like I have seen the argument online about like why people don't like this book, because it is very much a different vibe than like the first 3 books in the ACOTAR series. And and people have a lot of complaints about it kind of ruining the image of two other specific characters in the series. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know. I'm trying to be vague here. People complain about it like ruining because of their actions throughout this book, but I feel like, and I've seen this argument again online, I feel like it does kind of make sense for this book to have a completely different vibe because of the character that you're following. Like, you're no longer in those characters' POVs, and so obviously it's not going to have the same vibe because this is essentially in two different characters' heads, you know, and so they're obviously not the same people. They're drastically different than those characters, and so I feel like it makes sense for the writing to not be the same because it's not the same person. They don't have the same emotions at all, you know, just a completely different worldview, and they're just a completely different person. So I feel like it makes sense. I feel like, again, the reason that it was written that way and they were portrayed that way is because of the POV that we were in. I don't know how else to explain it. I feel like it makes sense to me, like why it was written this way, because of the characters that we were following. I don't know. I loved this book. I'm definitely a fan of the main character in this book, and the Valkyrie. I want to be a Valkyrie. The next one I have is the reappearance of Rachel Price. I think I listened to mostly the audiobook for this one, and then I also did like a read along with this, but this one I rated 3.75. The premise of this is so interesting. So in this book, you are following Belle. She is the daughter of a woman who randomly disappeared one day when she was a baby while she was with her. So Belle was found as a baby abandoned in the car, and her mom was never seen again. Her mom was Rachel Price. Way on later down the road, a filming documentary crew approaches the Price family and asks if they can film a documentary on the disappearance of her mom. And throughout the course of that documentary, her mom reappears. And so everyone's like confused, like, where have you been all of this time? And how did you just randomly show up back again? And while we're filming a documentary about you, like, that's such crazy timing. So yeah, you're basically following that throughout the course of this book. And I did not see the ending coming in this at all. Definitely good. It's definitely not my favorite Holly Jackson book. I definitely liked A Good Girl's Guide to Murder more than this. I rated that one 5 stars, and this one I rated 3.75, but it's definitely still really good. It's really easy to, again, get into and understand. It is a YA mystery thriller, so it does kind of like get into it, but it's nothing like too crazy, I feel like, because it is YA. So I do really like Holly Jackson's writing style. Next we have When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I feel like my feelings for this, I'm so conflicted because on one hand, I really enjoyed like the second half of this book, but I feel like on the other hand, I didn't even understand like what this book was even about until I was like 300 pages into the book. And then also the last like 50 pages of this book just had me so confused. And like maybe if I understand the last 50 pages of this book, the rating would be a lot higher, because I genuinely really enjoyed the last 300 pages of this book, like the last half of it basically, up until the very end where I was once again confused. I feel like I kind of understand the ending a little bit better because I've seen a few TikToks, but I just feel like I probably am not fully understanding the ending still. And I do think if I understood it more, I probably would have rated it a little bit higher. I just think because I didn't fully understand what just happened, I didn't rate it higher because I was just confused. Like, I was just so confused. But like, when I tell you, the slow burn in this was so beautifully written. And when I say slow burn, I mean like you don't even get a semblance of romance until 500 pages in maybe, but like once you get there and things are unveiled, you're just like, it's not even about the smut at that point. It's just, oh my God. Like once you realize, I don't know. I'm still conflicted with this book. I feel like it deserves a higher rating because so much happened in this, and I enjoyed it so much once I understood, but I just feel like because I got re-confused, it kind of lowered it for me. But that's not the book's fault. Like that's my fault. So I don't know. Right now we're sitting at a 3. I put it in the middle because I just don't know. Like I'm just conflicted. So maybe in the future I will update my rating and like raise it once I like understand what happened more, but I just don't know. So I feel like it deserves more than a 3 though, even talking about it, but I just don't know. Next we have The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This was my first ever Riley Sager book, and it was so good. This is like a gothic thriller. I feel like this was the perfect vibe going into like September, October spooky season, because it's set in an old mansion that is like on the edge of a cliff that is kind of deteriorating. So the whole mansion is like on a tilt. It's like very eerie vibes, and essentially the girl who lives in this mansion. Her name is Lenora Hope. When she was like a teenager, her entire family was murdered in this mansion and she was the only one left alive. But because of that instance, she was left unable to speak, unable to move. And once we are now current day, she's very old and bedridden. She has to hire a at-home nurse. And so that is who we're following in the story. You're following the nurse. Her name is Kit. So you're following Kit. She is a at-home nurse. Once she gets there, Lenora kind of starts opening up to her and reveals that she is able to type on a typewriter, and she reveals to her that she wants to tell her the full story of what happened, something she has never revealed to anyone ever before. And so throughout the course of the story, you're just trying to figure out like who murdered Lenora Hope's entire family, because a lot of people in the town speculate that it was Lenora, but no one was ever charged for it. So nobody really knows because she was never able to speak about it, and there was no like sure proof that Lenora did it because they never found a murder weapon. So I don't know, you basically just follow that. I ended up reading this one 3.5 stars. I feel like it didn't necessarily move fast enough for me. Like you get 200 pages into the book and it's only been 3 days. It definitely got points for being thrilling. Like there were multiple scenes where I was like actually afraid. So definitely got points for being like really creepy, really eerie, had very thrilling elements and moments for sure. But like the ending, I feel like lost me a little bit because some of the characters ended up doing things where it just felt like they weren't doing it because that's like how the character would act. It just felt like they were doing it for the sake of doing it for the plot, if that makes sense. So that kind of took me out of the story because at the end, when some characters were like making decisions, it just felt like, why are you doing that? It didn't seem like something that the character would do. It didn't feel like organic to the story. It just felt like it was kind of put in there because we needed to progress the plot and like have a crazy ending. So I haven't really looked at the other ratings for this. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels that way. I should look it up. It was good though. Like it was good. I feel like if you want, like I said, a really atmospheric, gothic, eerie type of thriller going into like spooky season, I feel like this was really good for that. Lastly, I again don't have the physical copy for this book, but I have Sidetracked. This is the second book in the Mindfuck series. I rated this one 4.5 stars. Again, it was really good. I don't want to talk about the plot of this one because at this point you are like very much into the story. So I don't really want to talk about the plot of this one, but again, so good. Every single one of the books ends on like a little cliffhanger too. So I love it because as soon as you end the little novella, you're like, oh my God, I have to start the next one right now. That is all I will say about that one. Loved it so much. So these are all of the books that I read over the course of this summer. I'm so glad to finally be out of that reading slump. It genuinely was like such a weight lifted off my shoulders once I realized like, oh, love it here again and I can actually start and finish books. Just the best feeling ever. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. If you're not already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future content from me, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!